In October of 1997, a 15-year-old boy named John Hartman was beaten to death on the streets of Fairbanks, Alaska. 4 young men, 3 of them Athabascan Indians, were convicted of his murder. Yet years later, the case remains open and unsolved. Who's responsible? How many killers were out on the streets that night? Was racism to blame for these convictions? I'm your host, Matt Ralston, and this is the story of John Hartman and the Fairbanks 4, case of murder on ice. George, the bad boy, wasn't the only one who had a rough night. Take Eugene Vint, the youngster. 17 years old. He's reserved, mercurial. Sometimes, later at trial, it would be difficult to tell what he was thinking, like if it was something profound or... He's in the thick of things downtown, which is spiraling into a huge mess already. As midnight rolled around, police took Saturday's first official call. An assault, 13 minutes into the new day. Officially Saturday, October 11th now. A theft and another assault call follow within 10 minutes. By 1 a.m., there was a burglary, a DUI, and disturbing the peace calls. And now this at 12:44 a.m.
Now, the neighbor, a white male, is out in the parking lot, out in his underwear. He's extremely intoxicated, and he's running around chasing a female with a firearm as well. You guys use caution here. If we've got the right person, he's got an extremely extensive criminal history, including weapons offenses and a couple felonies.
Eugene is uninvolved with this current mess with the crazy guy in his underwear with the gun in the parking lot. But he's nearby. He'll get into trouble later, get arrested. A motel party gets out of control. Police respond, and Eugene is identified as pointing a gun at the motel's night clerk. Within just days, he'll be accused of murder. Eugene spent the evening partying and hopping around town with a group of friends, including another of the Fairbanks 4, Kevin Peace, the white boy. As John Hartman lay in the intensive care unit of the Fairbanks Memorial Hospital, barely clinging to life, detectives were already making headway on the case the following day. 20-year-old George Freese had shown up to the hospital that morning with an injured foot. The nurse on duty put 2 and 2 together, a victim who was badly stomped, and a guy with a bum foot that said he hurt it in a fight. She compared the boot tread on George's boots to the marks on the victim's face and called the authorities. After a grueling interview with no lawyer present, he finally confessed. "Alls I know is that we kicked his ass, and I don't know why," he said. Next, Detective Aaron Ring of the Fairbanks Police Department would focus his attention on 17-year-old Eugene Vint, the youngster of the Fairbanks 4, who had been arrested early that morning, walking home after a drunken party, which led to a parking lot brawl at a local motel, the Alaska Motor Inn. The motel was just blocks from the site of the John Hartman attack. The party at the Alaska Motor Inn was pivotal to the charges eventually filed against Eugene, as well as the other 3 members of the Fairbanks 4, as Eugene would be accused of brandishing a gun at the motel's night clerk, who would identify him later that night from a squad car. Before we get into what took place there, let's take a rundown of Eugene's night prior to arriving at that motel. At 10 p.m., Eugene is picked up from his house downtown in a van packed full of kids. They all go to a house party at a friend's house about 15 to 20 minutes away, far on the western edge of town, a neighborhood called Chena Small Tracks. A friend named Kevin Bradley has the house to himself this night. His mom's out of town, so he's throwing a party. Eugene is joined by Kevin Peace, the white boy at the party.
My name is Kevin Bradley. And I was involved with the Fairbanks 4 situation. So that night, 2 of the fellas were at my house, and I could account for their whereabouts before like midnight or 11, but after that they went home with some other friends. I don't know what happened, but knowing those 2 guys, this was not in their nature to go beat up someone, as I to my knowledge.
So you were having a house party.
Just a basic adolescent party where just try to smoke and drink, see what happens. Ran out of drink, or we need to go get more beer, or it came to that point in the night. So I felt too intoxicated to drive my car. My friend Joe Shank, who arrived later, or I knew he was good. He was my best friend at the time. So I gave him keys in my car. And he took, say, like 5 or 6 people. He didn't really say where he was dropping them off, but as I gather, there's a wedding in downtown Fairbanks that everyone was kind of meet up at.
So you just knew these 2 guys, and they were just normal, just guys, just bros that you see around town?
Just bros, my age, so we kind of, we shared this common friends, but they weren't like my A-list or B-list, if you will. Totally surprising, because Eugene and Kevin didn't come off as, hoodlums, or it seemed like way out of left field that they were accused of it. But again, they were kind of, not my tight circle. I never got the impression that they were like this. I mean, there was.
What? So I'm a white guy from Fairbanks, perhaps the whitest, which is.
Oh, you're from Fairbanks, or?
Yeah, I was born in Fairbanks.
What school did you go to?
West Valley.
Did we know each other, or?
Yeah, we were on the basketball team together.
Matt Ralston. Okay. Now I've connected some dots here. And this is a weird memory, because the victim was John Hartman.
Did you know Hartman?
No, but I think his girlfriend at the time was in my Spanish class.
Oh.
And I didn't say shit to her the rest of the year. I just, because I had this secondary guilt, so I never brought it up. She never brought it up, but it was like, at the time that they were found guilty, I, somewhat interact with his girlfriend all the time. I was like, all right, at least.
So you almost felt guilt by association, even though you didn't obviously do anything.
Yeah, but, was there something I could have done? Type deal. Those thoughts get in your head. Sorry, I didn't totally straight up recognize you first off, but when you filled in some of the blanks, like, oh, crap. Sorry about that.
They all chill for a while, a hangout of 12 or more people, which is cool but uneventful. So the host of the party has his best friend named Joey Shank, who wasn't drinking that night, take his mom's car, a blue Nissan, and they go to the wedding reception at the Eagles Hall downtown, the place to be that night. Eugene, as well as Kevin, the white boy, are in the car. They leave the house, according to them, at 1:30 a.m., the time that John Hartman was attacked. It's about a 15-minute drive to the wedding reception, which is also near the site of the attack. Joey Shank, the driver, was sober, and he was nervous because he was driving his friend's mom's car, which was packed with drunken teenagers. So he was aware of everything and keeping track of the time. The sardine car arrives at the wedding reception at 1:50 a.m. Joey Shank, as well as the others, did not notice Eugene Vint get out of the car on the way to the reception and stomp a guy to death. They arrived at 1:50 a.m., they say. The group are looking for a friend who is selling drugs. They're trying to buy weed. After 5 minutes of sitting in the parking lot at the reception, they don't find who they're looking for and take off again. They head over to their friend/pot dealer's house at 1:55 a.m. He isn't home, but several members of the group decide to stay and hang out at his house, including Kevin. And Joey Shank drives the rest, including Eugene, back to the wedding reception at 2:05 a.m. Eugene ends up inside the reception hall at about 2:05 a.m. He's drunk. It's remarked that he looks too drunk to even kick anyone's ass. He's just hitting on girls and people are laughing at him. Now, what do you want? He's 17. At 3 a.m., the wedding reception finally comes to an end. But not to worry. There's word of a party a few blocks away at the Alaska Motor Inn, room 107. Eugene decides to walk over. This is almost never a good idea. The Alaska Motor Inn is a pretty crappy motel downtown. I spoke to a few people who were there, and nobody even knows whose room this was, but it was a room, and apparently everyone was welcome. There was a lot of booze, and it was obviously a total sausage fest. As it got late, things got pretty rowdy. Someone had brought a bunch of leftover food from the reception, which prompted a food fight in the parking lot. Generally speaking, there's a lot of testosterone and people are drunk, and it's starting to get weird. Cue Mike Baca, the front desk clerk at the Alaska Motor Inn. He's 27 years old, a half Mexican, half Native American guy from New Mexico. He's wearing a trucker hat with long black hair flowing out of the snapback. He's not happy. He's been having problems with this party all night, trying to break it up, trying to quiet things down. He's been predictably ignored, and now he's on the phone with police with an axe to grind. And he'll probably have to clean up that food in the parking lot. He tells the cops that he has a party that's out of control in the room. The cops, who are busy with a lot of other things, including this guy who's holding someone hostage, blow him off.
We've got a couple things going on right now, but we'll be over as soon as we can.
Soon, Mike Baca calls back again and reports at least 7 people fighting in the parking lot. The party's now devolved into a drunken brawl, and this is pissing Mike Baca off even more. He goes outside and gets into it with the guys. He pepper sprays a few of them. He calls the police to report this, that one of the guys in the parking lot tried to attack him. Still, nothing really happens. So he gets off the phone and goes back outside again. Now he comes back saying, "Motherfucker, fucker pulled a gun on me." This statement is picked up by the security camera in the lobby. As noted earlier, it was a wild night. It was permanent fund dividend time, and downtown Fairbanks was full of people, with a rare excess of cash, getting rowdy. The police were receiving more calls than they could possibly deal with, and still dealing with this lunatic a few blocks south, which ended with an arrest at 4:40 a.m. A drunken party wasn't a high priority. But when the dispatcher heard Mike Baca mention a gun, this upped the ante.
We'll be over.
Police arrived, but by then the entire party had scattered. About 4:30 a.m., police tackle a drunken Eugene. He's walking alone and unarmed. No gun. He's 4 blocks from where John Hartman was murdered. He says he was on his way home, and indeed he's walking from the motel in the direction of his house. The police get Mike Baca into their squad car. He points out Eugene as the guy who pulled the gun on him. There are a lot of questions about whether Eugene actually did this, or if a frustrated Mike Baca made it up, exaggerating because he was having no luck getting the police to arrive. You gotta wonder, would Eugene, a gun being maybe the most valuable thing he owned, have tossed it, having run away from the Alaska Motor Inn parking lot as cops were showing up, or stashed it somewhere? It makes sense he would run. All the minors involved in the party were afraid of getting the ubiquitous minor-consuming alcohol tickets. But would he have tossed this gun or assumed he was in the clear? Eugene would be charged separately with pointing the gun at Mike Baca and acquitted. Here's Mike Baca's version of events. There was a party in one of the rooms, and
that kid ended up dead and shit.
Yeah, I'm producing a show about the whole thing.
Oh shit! Well, what do you want to know?
Could you tell me what you remember about it briefly?
They came and they rented a room there. Well, not the actual person who did this shit, but they rented a room. They threw a party there at the hotel. We threw them out once. They came back. When they came back is when they kind of tried to threaten my ass and they tried, you know what I mean? I'm the one that scared them out of the hotel, and they left from there. When they left from there is when they killed that kid. No?
So you had been trying to get the party to calm down for...
Yeah, I had already stopped it once, and then it started up again. No?
And then they came out...
Yeah, when the second time it came is when those are the ones that came that they had already done a rampage all over the place that they tried to do at my hotel, and they didn't pull that shit off there at all.
Meaning like they were fighting and throwing stuff around and stuff?
Oh, yeah. They wanted to fight with me and everything, but they weren't going to get far on that part. Because I was the type to want to fight back too, no? I wasn't like, I was going to back down. It didn't scare me.
But you were one guy, and were you by yourself, or did you have other...
Well, no. 4 of them took off from me. Yeah. I had my own weapons too. Yeah.
And so you pepper sprayed...
I pepper sprayed the shit out of one of them, and 3 of them took off, and one stayed there trying to act brave.
And do you remember who that was?
By name, no. I would by face if I see him.
Was that a native guy?
Yeah.
So one of them pulled a gun on you, right?
Yes, sir.
And this was towards the end of all the back and forth?
Yeah. He pulled it on me, and I looked at him like, what are you going to do with that? I'm going to shove it up your ass, is what I told him, and I pulled out mine, and that's when he took off running.
So you had a gun, too?
Yeah.
What kind of gun did he pull?
It looked like 9mm to me.
So you were calling, and then when you called the police...
Yeah, the cops called already like 4 or 5 times. They were just making mayhem all over. So the cops were already busy with all that crap that by the time they showed up to me, it turned into a whole other crap.
You had already been calling them, but they showed up after you identified someone had pulled a gun on you, right?
Yeah, it wasn't until it got to that extreme that before the cops actually showed up to me, yeah.
And how long after that did it take for them to come?
Shit. You're still looking at like 20 minutes.
So the police put you in a cruiser to identify the person who had pulled the gun on you, correct?
Yes.
And that was, you said you don't remember his name, but that was Eugene Vent?
I knew him by look, no. I didn't know him by name. I knew him because he didn't rent the hotel or nothing from me. They were just partying in there. He just tried to get brave when I told him to get the fuck out. No?
And how old was he, roughly, did he look?
He was a younger guy. They weren't older, you know what I mean? They looked like maybe, I wouldn't say between 17 to 21 right there. They were all in their young partying, you know what I mean? It wasn't older fuckers.
Right. So when you saw him, you were sure it was the same person?
Oh, yeah. There was no doubt about that one.
Yeah. A lot of the reason that detectives focused on this guy, Eugene, was that you identified him as having a gun, and when they found him, he didn't have a gun.
No, he didn't. I don't know how that worked out there. They found him, they were a ways from the hotel when they caught up with him.
Yeah.
So where he dumped it, what he did after that, I couldn't tell you.
You weren't ever exaggerating anything so that the police would come or anything like that?
No, it was all on videotape. They had it all. They wanted to throw their little party and think they could get away with it. I wasn't going to let it go down in the hotel, and that's when it got violent.
Okay, so I just want to make sure I'm getting this right. Before you
That's why I tell you, the DA, the cops, everybody over there, if they haven't showed you tapes for you to see what went down at the hotel, then they're not giving you everything.
Yeah, I've seen some stills of the tape, but I'm just trying to get.
That's what I mean. They're showing you stills. They're not showing you the whole tape. Down to show you the whole tape from the time the party incident happened to the time I'm chasing him down the street. Because I chased him. I wasn't afraid, like I tell you. I was down to fight right there. Yeah, when they wanted to pull a gun and shit, you have the right to. So he's lucky he didn't get his ass shot. Is what is he lucky?
Right. So you verified yourself that the person that you identified was the same person that they arrested afterwards.
Yeah, they already had him. I told them, you want to see, I can show you. We had it on tape. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that makes sense.
Inside, he's on tape outside, he's on tape going down the road. It's all the same time.
So when he pulled a gun on you, did you have a gun? You had a gun on you, on your...
Yeah.
Like on a holster or something?
Yeah.
So he pulled his out and then you pulled yours out.
No, he could see it. If you couldn't see it, something was wrong with him.
Well, that was pretty stupid of him.
Yeah, well, for the job I had, dude, it wasn't like you just sat there and carried just pepper spray. It wasn't that kind of job.
Because on the transcripts of the tapes, you had pepper sprayed them, then went inside again. You told some people you'd pepper sprayed them. I guess the tenant that was in the lobby, maybe just one person.
Yeah.
And then they still didn't leave after being pepper sprayed, so you went out again, and that's when he took the gun out.
I already had it. I had it from the first time.
No, that's when he took
my
it.
deal was to pepper spray, not to kill somebody, you know.
Right.
I could have killed him if I wanted to.
Right.
You know what I mean? I had every right. Like the cop told me that night, I had every right to shoot if I wanted to. You know what I mean? I chose to use pepper spray and figuring these fuckers would stop right there.
A lot of people say Mike Baca is not credible, that he boasts a lot and tries to sound really tough. And in talking to him, that may be true. And I don't know exactly what he saw, but I do find him to be credible. And I think if he really thought he was that tough, he would have used his weapon, which he didn't. There are some inconsistencies in Mike Baca's story. For example, when shown a photograph of John Hartman's clothing, he told police that John Hartman had been at that party at the Alaska Motor Inn. But this was entirely not true, and was a major reason that detectives focused on this group at the party. And I also read that they had showed you a photo of the victim's clothes, which was a camouflage shirt and blue corduroy pants, and that you had said someone wearing those clothes had been at the motel. Do you remember that?
Not right offhand. I can't remember exactly what part it was.
After Eugene had been arrested in the early morning hours, police had become much more aware of the beating that had taken place hours earlier. Now they know it's a likely homicide. They know that an unidentified victim is in intensive care, that he might not make it through the night. Eugene's questioning by Detective Aaron Ring would begin soon after he was arrested. He was taken to the Fairbanks Youth Facility, where he was processed with a blood alcohol level of 0.168, meaning, like George, he was still intoxicated. He had $500 on him. He's read his rights and denies wanting a lawyer or his mother present since he's a minor. He's interrogated on and off for the better part of 11 hours. He's first awoken in his cell at 7 a.m., still drunk. He says he's hungry and that he'll give Detective Ring $1 if he buys him a cheeseburger. He receives nothing to eat before his 2-hour interview. He's roused again at 1 p.m. for a second interview. What transpires is confusing, yet it's incriminating. Eugene meanders in his answers to Detective Ring's questions, yet toward the end of the process he finally states that he, quote, kicked him about 10 times, to the arms, to the body, to the head. His account is inconsistent and wavering. He continues to say, "I was drunk," over and over again, yet sometimes he provides specific details of the attack. For the first hour or so of the interrogation, depending on which side you fall into, he's either playing dumb or he thinks he's in trouble for his involvement in a minor pot deal. He keeps talking about 2 guys he was meeting up with who wanted him to broker a $40 weed purchase, but it turns out they weren't even in the state of Alaska that night. He's just rambling, talking nonsense, like a sloppy drunk, wasting his own time and everyone else's. Testifying at his own trial 2 years later, "If I wasn't drunk, I wouldn't have made that story up," he said. The following are actual interrogation transcripts, read by actors who I paid in beer.
If you got a legitimate reason why these things are happening, I'd like to hear it, okay?
I don't have a legitimate reason. I'm telling you, there's fights going on downtown every night. I'm telling you, trying to give you knowledge of it. They got mad because I guess Michael Loonbacher or Michael Williams, he a little weed, and I guess it didn't work out that way.
Eugene is referencing some fight that did or didn't happen. He's incoherent around this time in the interview. He's jumping around. But note, he is familiar with fights happening downtown. Much later, Detective Ring uses a tactic that'll come into play time and time again. He provides false information to Eugene, stating that his footprint was found in the blood at the scene of the beating. Detective Ring also, in an attempt to explain what blood spatter is, talks about punching Eugene in the face. From my perspective, this could be a method of intimidation.
Maybe I'm mistaken, but I'm not mistaken about blood on your shoe. Okay. There's also some blood spatter on your jacket. What we call spatter is it's little tiny droplets of blood, like if I were to punch you in the nose. The blood would come out pretty fast, right? And the harder I hit you, the faster I hit you, the tinier those drops would be, okay? And that's what you got on your jacket. Okay, so obviously you were involved in the fight.
Next, Detective Ring arrives at what he considers a smoking gun. John Hartman was found with his pockets having been emptied. Next to his body, his personal belongings were scattered. A lighter, a book of matches, and a pack of Big Red gum, among other things. This was at a scene that had already been contaminated, including having a car drive through it.
There's nothing on this lighter that we found on the ground, nothing on the matches. Did you drop a lighter or matches or anything there that...
It's over in...
What about matches?
No, I don't have matches. I might have gave him a piece of gum. You're confusing me, man.
What about a pack of gum?
Well, I had a pack of gum, man.
Are you missing another pack of gum?
Oh, that's all I have.
Okay.
That's when I knew we had him. I hadn't said anything about gum up to that point, said Detective Ring later. This is one of the strongest pieces of evidence this case would have. a case without any DNA evidence, and little, if any, physical evidence. How would Eugene Vent have known that John Hartman was found with a pack of gum next to him? Does his statement, "I might have given him a stick of gum," mean anything? Would someone want a stick of gum if they already had a whole pack? Keep in mind, Eugene is saying all kinds of things during his hours of interrogation. Most of it's total nonsense. So to seize on this one thing, gum, a pretty common item that teenagers would have, doesn't make a lot of sense. Especially when Eugene follows this statement with, "You're confusing me, man." Now, the prosecution would focus on his statements when they backed up their case, but disregard them when they didn't. That's a bit of a double standard. Hours and hours into the interrogation, Eugene is beginning to crack. He says he was there, that he hit him, probably, but he doesn't really remember because he was drunk.
It was out of anger.
Did this happen all outside of the car, or did some of it happen inside the car?
Outside the car, probably.
Well, not probably. I need to know what happened.
Yeah, it happened outside of the car.
Okay. And what was this person hit with?
Probably a bunch of fists and feet.
How many people?
3 people.
Okay. Were you one of those 3 people?
I guess I was.
No, not a guess. Were you one of those 3 people?
Yeah.
Okay. How many times did you hit this person while he was standing? Again, we're talking about detail.
Probably just once, and then I probably kicked. Yeah, I kicked him a couple times.
You kicked him a couple times.
Yeah.
Where?
On his arms.
If it's in the head, that's okay. I mean, I need you to say that.
Those who believe this to be a false confession would say that Eugene is now actually believing Detective Ring due to all the false evidence presented to him. This tactic is legal, though it's waning in use.
I know you've been trying. I understand you've been trying. That's why I didn't give up on you in here. Okay. And I'm not going to give up on you. Who pulled this man's pants down and put something up him?
I don't know. That's probably why we did it, because he was queer. I don't know.
That's why you ran off, I think.
I don't know.
Because that happened.
I'm telling you, I didn't have nothing to do with it. That is sick. I wouldn't.
Who did?
I don't know.
Was it you?
No.
Who got out of the car?
Just me and Kevin. And then I guess we beat him up and I left. And I got arrested. I left, I ran.
The details he presents to Detective Ring are not consistent with the eventual charges, it should be noted. Eugene tells Detective Ring he was driving the car, but no one thinks this is true. It could be noteworthy that Eugene is comfortable talking about fighting, throwing fists, kicking people, but he's not comfortable talking about a guy having a 40-ounce bottle or some other object shoved up his ass. This makes you think that Eugene is relatively normal.
You need to get this out. Okay, let's talk about it. You guys saw this guy walking. You were drinking, a little rowdy. What was said? What's that?
I don't know.
Well, what kind of things were said? What was the gist of it?
I think it happened because he was queer. That's why.
And how do you know? How do you know he was queer if you just saw him?
That's why. I guess one of the people knew. I don't know.
Okay. Do you have anything against homosexuals?
No.
Do you?
I guess so.
You feel uncomfortable around them?
Yeah, maybe.
They make you angry?
No, they just, I don't know. I just don't like them.
So you guys got out. What happened then?
We beat him up.
What did you do to take part in that?
Beat him up.
With what?
My shoe, knuckles,
We're talking about kicking? Are we talking about stomping?
kicking him in his arms mostly. His arms.
What about his head?
Once or twice.
Okay.
I wonder if Detective Ring has introduced this hate crime angle just to make Eugene uncomfortable. It probably depends on whether or not you think Eugene is guilty or innocent. If his responses are total nonsense or kind of troubling and weird.
Okay, and we're back on tape. A minute. I think that we're done at 7:16 p.m. Is there anything else that you'd like to add?
I'm sorry for what's happened.
Okay.
I feel bad.
All right. All right, have you felt forced to talk about this in any way? Coerced? Or felt like you were promised anything if you told the truth here, this story or anything like that?
No.
Okay. Have you felt threatened in any way by myself? I mean,
No.
or any other police officers?
No.
Now that Eugene has confessed to taking part in beating John Hartman, and George Freese's confession coming soon at the hospital, police had some momentum. Eugene saw a good friend of his, Harley Simikin, at the party that night. He mentioned him in the interrogation a couple times, that he'd been looking for Harley. Harley's a native guy, a few years older than Eugene. I wanted to talk to Harley anyway, because I wanted to talk to everyone who was at that party. But a video I saw on his Instagram page really piqued my interest. His username is Banks Native. It was Harley talking about what happened that night, talking about being young and stupid, getting into fights. In discussing that night, Harley says that the murder of John Hartman was an act of hatred committed by natives against one teenage white boy. This is the video. Note, I cut it short just for time purposes.
Good morning. So I wanted to share a short story about my past and my history. This is something that went down 1997, and it's called Past Lives Caught Up. We were 18. Life as a thug, being new, exciting, no limit to what we could do. It's a mindset. There were girls, booze, weed. We all lived for that. That's what I lived for. And the anger and the rage that I felt for a father that was never there, it consumed me. And I was starving for attention with all that I stood for. There was no care, no love. Only man enough to fight and steal and cheat. I was a weapon. I was a weapon that ran with the wrong crowd. It was mid-October. It was just starting to get cold. And the only goal was to meet up with my crew and keep the party going. Every move I made ended in a bad way. Being a player, playing just to play, it got me in trouble. We weren't the only ones out there with the same train of thought, but we were the only ones to get caught. These guys, they were out for blood, and we were out just to have a good time. These murderers killed a boy for no reason. They raped him and beat him to his death. The truth took 17 years to come to light, and my crew stayed in prison for that long. 17 birthdays, 17 Christmases. All their mothers cried tears for them. All their friends moved on and left. 3 things happened that night to me. I got beat up by my ex-girlfriend's current boyfriend. I got maced with pepper spray, and I was one step shy of being a convicted murderer. Through interrogation and harsh judgment, the cops interrogated me, but I knew my story, and I made it home. For the next several months, harsh judgment fell upon my friends, and they were labeled as murderers, profiled as having brutally beaten, raped, and killed a young white boy. It was racist. It was an act of hatred committed by natives against one teenage white boy. The humiliation, the hurt, the embarrassment, all the feelings of loneliness, anger, abandonment. Processing all these mixed feelings was difficult to do. It took a very long time to heal from this traumatic part of my life.
This is Harley. Now, his account of that night differs significantly from that of Mike Baca, who I did find credible. I also find Harley credible, and I know a lot of people that know him. We have common friends. With everything that was going on, it was chaotic. I think there's more than one truth.
What happened at the Alaska Motor Inn?
Well, there was a lot of heavy drinking. You know, that was the main reason for being there was to get, you know, as drunk as possible.
Always.
Yeah,
Did you get maced?
I did. I was outside the hotel, and I just remember somebody saying the cops were coming. And my friend Eugene was one of the bearing floor, was with me. And we were standing there, and the hotel clerk came up to us.
Mike Baca.
I guess I don't remember ever seeing him or me. He was the hotel guy, hookup, right?
Mm-hmm. I'm sorry. So what happened? So you guys were out in the parking lot. Were you trying to leave the party, or you're just out, just fucking around?
Yeah, we were trying to party, and the only thing that I can think of is he just came up and maced me. Like I don't remember being violent or, you know, acting aggressive or any kind of situation that would provoke him to do that. I believe it was for no reason. But according to him, and I think it's said in the papers, or, you know, I think he might have told the police, or I think he told somebody that I had a weapon. I was holding a gun.
Did he specifically say that you had a gun? Or just someone had a gun?
Well, I think he said that the reason he maced me was because I was holding a gun.
Were you holding a gun?
No.
Did you?
No, I didn't have any kind of weapon on me. I don't know. He was trying to kick us out, but he couldn't kick us out, so he told the cops there was somebody there with a gun, so they would kick us out. You know, I don't remember anybody fighting or nothing like that. Like I said, we had some food from the reception, and then we had a little food fight outside on the sidewalk. You know, so he might have saw that or whatever. But as far as, you know, drinking at the room, there was no fights or, you know, nothing broke and nothing bad happened. It was just a spot that we, you know, stay warm and you know, have a good time.
Like, obviously you guys were kind of just drinking all night, but how did your night start? Would you mind walking me through it in as much detail as you want? It's fine. To Eugene being arrested and all that.
Well, before I get into that, I can tell you that, after I got maced was when Eugene got arrested.
Right. Like,
So, yeah.
pretty much shortly thereafter, right?
Yep. From the time I was interrogated, to the whole, throughout the whole night. But they showed me pictures of the victim, which was John Hartman. Yeah, in the hospital, like, his head was all swollen, and wanted to know if I knew who that was. I didn't know him. Yeah, they showed me pictures of him in the hospital, asking me if I knew him. And, I said no. I didn't know him. And the whole interrogation was, it was just, they were trying to build a case off of people. So, reading the transcripts and seeing, like, Eugene talk about everybody from high school, everybody that we went to school with, he was a year or two younger than me. So, just the names that he gave them were brought to their attention. Like, none of it made any sense to me, the things that he was saying. And I think, because we weren't, we weren't that good at kids. Like, we would drink and party and fight, we caused a little bit of trouble now and then. And, I think, so there was a few different times that we had gotten into fights with other people. And, whether it was kids that went to a different school or just random people downtown. And then, just being kids, like, showing how tough we are or whatever. My whole point that I'm making is that he could have easily been persuaded because of the things that we have done, because of the fights we got into, or the people that, like, it's separate, it was like a whole different thing, like,
Yeah.
like 2 weeks before, or, like a month before that, you know what I mean?
Yeah, I might have kicked him. That could have been a couple weeks ago. You might have kicked someone.
Yeah, so, I think that's what happened, and he was basically saying, well, I guess if you said I did it, then I must have did it, and that's where he fucked up. It's like thinking about a different time.
You were buddies with Eugene. Did you know Kevin or George or Marvin also?
Yeah, all four of us were good friends.
Is there any chance that night someone could have done something?
I'm not sure what you mean.
I have to ask, if there was a fight and someone didn't remember, is it possible that someone could have stomped someone to death and not remembered?
No. And I'll tell you why. There's a difference between fighting to show how tough you are and brutally murdering somebody. Like, none of us had that kind of hatred in us, and it wasn't something that we even when we did get in a fight, the dude got beat up and then walked away, like, or, you know what I mean? Like it was always whoever one-on-one, and then when you lost, you lost. You didn't, like, stomp somebody's head in or, like, beat them to death. It was just a fair fight.
Aaron Ring.
Between him and Officer Kendricks, like, between the two of them and, what I knew that happened, my story, and the part that I could tell them, it was almost like they wanted more, They needed more from me than what I gave them. And I knew my friends were innocent, and I told them my friends are innocent. Like, you arrested the wrong people. This is not something that they did. This is not something that I was a part of. And, I didn't see a couple of those guys that night. And then when I did, it was briefly, but, it just so happened that, right before Eugene was arrested, I was with him. And then, the police came to the place that I was at and brought us all down to the station to be interrogated.
Detective Ring was trying to be intimidating. Did you get that impression?
So
I don't know, man. I've never been interrogated or interviewed by police. So believe it or not.
Okay, so all this is being recorded, and you want to know like what kind of in a negative way. I don't really want to. I don't feel comfortable telling you that. You know what I mean?
I happen to have never been interrogated by police. That's what I meant by that.
All right. So you're talking to a native dude that has broken a ton of laws and been arrested.
After talking to Harley, I find that he's clearly not claiming to have been involved in John Hartman's murder or to know any inside information about what happened. I guess I've just been thinking about murder too much. My mind goes to a crazy place right away. The thing about native hatred against a white boy, he's paraphrasing what people who say the Fairbanks Four are guilty would say. He's saying that him and his friends got into fights a lot. They broke up fights, they got into more fights. They won fights and lost fights. Like Eugene told Detective Ring, there's fights every night downtown. This behavior wasn't exclusive to natives. People fought a lot. You had to make friends to avoid getting your ass kicked. And if you had enough, you were usually okay. But John Hartman had been either alone that night or with one other kid named Chris Stone, who had a few enemies. A lot of people that wanted to kick his ass. More on that later. We've now covered two of the Fairbanks Four, George and Eugene, and how they came to be charged with the brutal murder and sexual assaults of John Hartman. Their interrogations differed from the other two of the Fairbanks Four pretty significantly. Both were still drunk from the night before, and both confessed to assaulting John Hartman, whereas the other two guys categorically denied any involvement. Many believe the confessions of George Freese and Eugene Vint to be invalid, that they were pressured into giving these statements, that the confessions are false. This is Richard Leo. He's one of the country's foremost authorities on false confessions and interrogation methods. Professor Leo had been called to testify about Eugene Vint's confession by the defense team. He flew all the way to Anchorage, but the judge didn't allow him to take the stand, concluding there was no way to test his explanations as to why people sometimes falsely confess. No empirical data. Professor Leo said this was highly unusual, though not unheard of. We opened talking about something called the Reed technique. This is how Fairbanks Police Department detectives were trained to interrogate their subjects. It is a controversial method.
We all know about the Reed method, that's what it's called.
Right. So that's the main method of interrogation in the United States, going back to the 1940s. It's accusatory, guilt presumptive, confirmatory, and confession driven. And the research community believes that the Reed method is a significant cause, or aspects of the Reed method are a significant cause of many false confessions. The Reed and Associates people claim the contrary, that their method does not lead to ever any false confessions, ever. No one in the academic research community, or virtually no one in the academic research community, would take that assertion seriously.
Because you want to get the truth out of it, right? You don't want to get just a confession that means nothing, I assume.
Well, that's what I think, but the problem is that the Reed people have designed a method that is geared toward getting a confession. Now, they say they just want to get the truth, but that's because me and another scholar in the 1990s started saying, quoting them, saying the purpose of interrogation was to get a confession. That's what they said about their method, which hasn't changed since the 1990s, hasn't really changed since the 1940s. But they used to put out promotional videos and say the purpose of the Reed method is to get a confession. And then when we started critiquing them, they suddenly changed and said the purpose is to get the truth. But they didn't change anything about the architecture of their method. And really the purpose still is to get an incriminating statement. So there's a couple things you have to realize. One, Reed-based interrogation training teaches investigators that they need to figure out the truth of whether somebody's innocent or guilty. And once they've reasonably concluded that the person is guilty, then they interrogate for the purpose of getting a confession. So when they say we're about getting the truth, not really. They're only about getting the truth that in interrogations that they believe the detective believes, or that the detective believes. So if the detective is wrong, then the detective is using these methods to get a confession to what the detective mistakenly believes is the truth. Because the whole Reed interrogation process is designed to break down denials and pressure and persuade the suspect to give an incriminating statement, ideally a narrative confession, that's consistent with the detective's theory of the crime.
Explain why someone in that condition maybe would say something that they didn't mean just because they wanted to have it end, if they were being intimidated, maybe?
Yeah, so people give false confessions usually when the interrogation is psychologically coercive and overbearing, when it breaks down their ability to resist, or when they think there's no way out, they're hopeless, and they're being threatened or promised a benefit, or just being told that they'll be able to leave or put an end to it. So Eugene Vent may have just felt coerced and overborne and just given them anything to put an end to what for him had become psychologically overbearing, maybe even psychological torture. Another possibility, and again, I'd have to review it more closely, but I think this was present there, is that they lied to Eugene Vent about alleged evidence in addition to threatening and coercing and or promising him leniency. Yeah, so police are allowed to lie about evidence. So they will tell you in interrogation, we have your fingerprints or a video or DNA or witnesses. And oftentimes will, if you continue to resist, just lie more and more, make up more evidence. Most people don't know police can lie. It can be very disorienting. People think, wow, how could that have happened? I don't have any memory of it. And that's what I think happened in Eugene Vent's case, that he came to doubt the reliability of his memory because they kept telling him that evidence that he did things that he didn't remember doing. And they came up with a narrative, correct me if I'm wrong, that he was blackout drunk, right? Or maybe it was a different narrative.
Yes, so they...
how he could have done something in the absence of memory. In your view, come to believe that he actually committed the crime? Or did he know he was lying because he had been coerced into falsely incriminating himself and just knowingly made up a story as opposed to genuinely believing it?
I think it's possible he was just there. Who knows?
Yeah, but impossible is one thing. But I think he was overborne, he was stressed out, he was feeling coerced. They lied to him, and he came to believe that he must have had some involvement, despite the fact that he had no memory, and either made up things in good faith or inferred from what they were saying the crime facts and spit something back to them that would put an end to it. Sometimes people come to believe they committed crimes that they have no memory of because the interrogators lead them to believe that. And I think that's what happened in Eugene Bent's case, in addition to his feeling stressed out and coerced and overborne and just wanting to get the hell out of there. When they were telling him there's all this evidence showing he did it, even though he didn't have a memory, it made it more plausible that he could have committed the crime or did commit the crime despite having no memory. Now, the Reed and Associates in their 2001 manual, for the first time, said to police that they train, if somebody says they have no memory of committing a crime, don't tell them they do, because that is associated with false confessions. Now, interrogations, Reed-based interrogations, I said, they're accusatory. They're all about telling the person they did it. Once the cop decides you're guilty, he or she is going to accuse you repeatedly of committing the crime and lying when you deny, no matter how many times you deny it. That's the basic foundation of interrogation. There's a lot more than just that. So they're saying don't tell somebody that they did it, despite having, if they say they have no memory, is not just trying to get the right guy. It's specifically telling them not to use a technique that previously they had said nothing about, that is a high-risk technique.
There you have it. A confession, but possibly a persuaded confession. I don't know how I feel about this. Certainly even a fascist, bloodthirsty prosecutor in the heart of old Alabama would admit that false confessions have, at some point, landed innocent people behind bars. But I also think even a furry at Berkeley, decrying the cultural insensitivity of the chimichangas on the menu at the cafeteria as a horrible microaggression, would need to admit that any confession probably should hold some consideration. And the convictions of the Fairbanks Four reflect the same polarity. I've not talked to many people who aren't certain they are innocent or certain they are guilty. Alaska Natives make up 16% of Alaska's population and around 40% of its prison population. There are still many Native people old enough to remember signs in Fairbanks, posted at many local businesses, which read, "No dogs or natives allowed." And these people aren't all that old. Frankly, there are things about this case that point to the Fairbanks Four being innocent. There was misconduct at the trials. For example, the state presented a piece of evidence, which Aaron Ring made. When I say he made it, like he actually bought materials to make it. Still, evidence points to their guilt. As we'll see, Kevin Peace, the white boy of the group, had a violent temper. Not only that, but he made up a false alibi about where he was when John Hartman was beaten to death. Why? We'll find out next time on Murder on Ice, the case of John Hartman and the Fairbanks Four. I'm your host, Matt Ralston. If you have any information about this crime, contact your local law enforcement or email me, alaskapodcast@gmail.com. Follow us on Twitter at Murder on Ice, on Instagram at Murder on Ice, on Facebook, Fairbanks Podcast. Follow me on Twitter, the Matt Ralston. Follow me on Instagram, the THE Matt Ralston, MATTRALSTON. Please tell a friend and rate and review on Apple Podcast. It takes about a minute. Thank you so much to Harley Simikin, Mike Baca, Professor Richard Leo, Jeff Richards for voicing the police, Travis Herndon as Eugene Bent, Will Lapardis as Aaron Ring. Music by Arlo Sanders, written and produced by me, Matt Ralston. Catch you next time.
We'll be over. We'll be over. We'll be over. We've got a couple things going on right now, but we'll be over as soon as we can.
Yeah, so just kind of reconstructing, that whole night. And, that was 1997, October 1997.